Okay, thank you, Veronica. So everybody should see the cover slide here on the screen, and a couple people are already, oh my gosh, it's not in presentation mode. What are we gonna do? So I'll go ahead and move it into presentation mode for that, if nothing else. So now everybody ought to be able to see the full blown up slide, to start the presentation. So this is a little bit of a hybrid presentation. Half of this relates to TE and talking about, using the reports and where to record things in TE. Half of it kind of refers to the overriding efforts that we've tried to put forth at CASAS to respond to AB 2098 and immigration. Looking at the participants, it looks like we're split pretty well down the middle between, teachers and instructors and researchers, probably looking more for the latter, and people that are more directly connected to TE looking more for the former. So hopefully this hits the sweet spot down the middle. It doesn't go really overboard on TE, but does get into the weeds in a few places. So overall, the first is review. Probably a lot of you sat in Jenny and Peter's presentation exactly a week ago, where they gave an overview of 2098, talked about California's commitment to immigrant integration, and talked about the immigrant integration indicators framework. So we will review a little bit of that so we can kind of connect the dots to some of the other things we'll talk about. We'll do a little bit of review kind of coming from the other direction as well. That is an overview of EL Civics in California. That's another one that, just eyeballing the participant list, looks roughly split down the middle. Some of you know EL Civics backwards and forwards and could easily do a full training on EL Civics. I think some of you are not familiar with it at all. So some real basic facts about what we've done with California EL Civics over the last 20 years, just to kind of show where all this information is coming from. And then we'll try to, connect the dots a little bit. As I like to say, number 3 is where we'll try to stick the chocolate bar into the jar of peanut butter, make that beautiful mixture. That is where we're relating these immigrant integration indicators to COAAP assessments we've used in California EL Civics for just about 20 years. And then we'll show how we've incorporated all this into the statewide CAPE reporting. There is a new column in the CAPE summary. Some of you have asked about it. I'll try to cover that a little bit. And then we'll get into the other reports we have at TE. There's a couple, we'll call sort of instructional related reports, or I'll say they're not really instructional reports, but they are modeled after some of the TE test results reports we've had for quite a while. That is ways in which you can use the assessment to inform instruction. When we talk about that in our TE test results reports, usually we mean relating pre and post test scores to that purpose, and use things like CASAS content standards and competencies to make it relatable to instruction. In this case, it uses the same philosophy, but it doesn't look at competencies or content standards. It instead is relating those specific EL Civics COAAPs. So again, we'll identify what those reports are, and we'll talk a little bit about hopefully how it can be useful to agencies in this area. Okay, so this is information directly from what Jenny and Peter presented a week ago. We have 10.6 million immigrants in California, over a quarter of our population. We have over 340,000 English language learners served every year by CAPE. We had a little bit lower number in 1920, but overall it held pretty steady. It didn't go down as much as people think. And we, through our, this program, it supports EL language acquisition and everything else under the sun. And we've got a lot of things in our EL Civics program that are able to document and verify the fact that our English language learners are, improving their literacy skills, number one, and also obtaining a wide variety of other skills through these COAAP assessments, number two. I'll add this bullet below is we've already got the data to show that our students are achieving these outcomes that we're going to be talking about. We have about 87,000 students in 1920 that achieved I3 outcomes. So we know the data is there. We'll look at this later, but I just like to point out that last year, nobody even knew we were supposed to be chasing immigrant indicator I3 outcomes, but without even knowing they exist, we had 87,000 students achieve them anyway. You know, that is, we're really just, the point I'm making is we're really just documenting stuff that most of us are probably doing and doing quite vigorously already. It's really just a way to document what we're doing. And it's also a way to use some additional information to hopefully, you know, improve instruction and improve other services for these learners as well. Okay, this is also in review. You know, we had SB 84 establish the statewide director of immigrant integration. AB 2098 was September of 2018. It put forth that language that directed, you know, the state to provide metrics related to immigrant integration. It put forth that AB 2098 work group that concluded in June of 2019. Okay, so dug into AB 2098 a little more deeply here, just to show that the language specifically addresses EL civics. You know, that's a little bit where we come in. So in this presentation, we're making a little bit bigger fuss about that part, you might say. But in AB 2098, it requires CDE and the Chancellor's Office to identify common measures consistent with, but not limited to, EL civics COAAPs. So the point here is just to show that the legislation had EL civics in mind. You know, there was definitely some lobbying with this that brought that to their attention, but they did agree with that and specify that EL civics would be one of the ways in which we would have a measure already in place. You know, from our point of view, this was a big help in getting it passed and moving forward with this, as we weren't coming up with anything new. Nobody had to create anything really. We had these metrics already in place and already in place for a very, very long time. It was a matter of just converting things that we've been doing and doing well and repositioning them for this purpose rather than necessarily needing to start at square one for anything. Okay, and again, it's specifying that we may collect this and we'd have a menu of common assessments that they would be using. So to some extent, you know, this is a heavy-handed way of saying this training is specifically stipulated by the legislature. That is, we need to have some metrics in response to 2098, and we need to be able to show that we have these common assessments on the ready for, you know, to be used by adult ed consortia. Okay, and then here, the last thing on 2098 is we have, you know, these 8 different areas that the legislation stipulates. I will add, a couple people pointed out, is there's actually 10 areas now. The work group added a couple, but these 8 basic areas, you know, not so coincidentally, are exactly what allies and others had put out as the areas in which immigrant integration needed to address. You know, I just bring that up, not so coincidental. And here's that graphic from Jenny and Peter's presentation. It's in the allies documentation. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this over the last 3 or 4 years. You know, this is a common graphic that's been out there floating around for a while. That is, you know, the 8 areas, you know, that allies originally introduced as the immigrant immigration framework. You know, lots of presentations have been done to address this. Okay, I'll pause here. I don't see any questions. Hopefully everybody's hearing me. Hopefully this is clear so far. I guess because I am transitioning, I will step back and make this a little bit of a sanity check. Good to go. All right. Thank you, Diane. Okay. So, all right. Thank you. Just like to sanity check. don't be afraid to reel me in if I drift too far out of context. I'll help reel myself in if necessary. So, okay, so that's a little bit of an overview from last week, as well as a little bit more details on 2098. Now we're going to come in from the, not really opposite direction, but from the different direction. That is an overview of California EL Civics. Definitely not new, but definitely new to CAPE reporting. So if you haven't been involved with this, here's some key dates. Starting with WIA in 1998, from our perspective, that's when a lot of this started. So we started the Workforce Investment Act. That is the federal legislation that put forward those valuable, federal grant dollars for the detailed testing and data collection we all know and love today. We started that in 1998-99, and then in 2001 is when we added EL Civics in California. That was the first year we did it. We had a couple years where, a lot of people would say it was probably a little bit like Wild West for a couple years. And after a couple years of that, we kind of organized it with a lot of different work groups into the system related to EL Civics everybody knows and loves today. That is the California EL Civics system with focus areas. So that started in 2003. We had two different focus areas, one called civic participation, one called citizenship preparation. Then in 2016, a little bit of a big jump, but for many years, we ran EL Civics with those two focus areas, and it went fine until 2016. That's when we started at the federal level with WIOA. That is WIOA. The short answer is WIOA was the federal legislation that replaced WIA. So we had the same basic system, but a whole new set of federal rules in 2016. Not going to get into all that, but one of the major differences between WIA and WIOA is WIOA included a component called Integrated EL Civics, or IELCE. Bottom line is WIOA specifically addressed EL Civics. WIA did it. So when WIOA included that, we added that as a third EL Civics focus area. So starting in 2016, EL Civics had three different areas, not just two anymore. IELCE was the one that combined English language instruction with workforce programs. A minor tweak in 2017 is we added what's called integrated education and training. That's the component that pretty much everybody's heard about. That's the one that gets all the media pub, you might say. But IET is more specifically geared toward providing a program for students that are simultaneously enrolled in ESL, EL Civics, and some kind of workforce training. So I like to say in California, we implemented this with the training wheels on, where we embraced IELCE full barrel the first year, but we waited a year before we added any requirements related to the workforce training specifically. And then a year ago is, what we're talking about here now, where CAPE adopted EL Civics COAAPs for the specific purpose of reporting I3 outcomes. Okay, a little bit more, just if you haven't worked with the EL Civics, these are the three focus areas. Citizenship preparation helps prepare learners to pass the U.S. citizenship exam. Civic participation has the broader focus of basically working on improving students' community integration skills. And then the newer one, not that new anymore, but new over the last 4 years or so, IELCE combines English language instruction with integrated education and training activities, meaning you've got workforce preparation on the EL Civics side. That is, in EL Civics, you're basically focusing on workforce related issues. And then it also combines the workforce training. That's the training related to career tech ed, or WIOA Title I, apprenticeship, and so on. That is the occupation specific workforce training. IELCE includes all four of those, or all three of those elements. Okay, a little bit more on this. to connect to the meat of the presentation is in EL Civics. 2 of those 3 EL Civics focus areas use those civic objectives and additional assessment plans, or COAAPs, to document student progress. Civic participation, the one that we've had in existence for a long time now, has about 60 different COAAPs. All 60 of those are authorized for civic participation. All 60 relate to some area related to community integration skills. Some of them address employment. Some of them address, civic duties. Some of them address healthcare. All kinds of different ways that help the student improve integration into the community. And then what we did when we started WIOA is, in California, we felt like we had a really, really strong EL Civics program already. Starting back at the top with WIOA, I think for many states, when WIOA started, EL Civics was a brand new thing. But in California, we felt it was anything but new. We had already been doing it for 15 years. So we decided, pardon the cliche, but we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We just took that IELCE component of the WIOA legislation and built it into our existing EL Civics structure and just added it as a 3rd focus area. At the same time, we also thought that those COAAPs that we had been using for EL Civic participation for a long time were really good ways to measure IELCE as well. So at the end of the day, they didn't all relate to workforce, but a lot of them did. So since the 2016-17 year, we've used COAAPs for these 2 areas, and civic participation, all of them are allowed. For IELCE, there's a more specific list. I think it totals about 25 now, where about 25 of the 60 are workforce related and thereby also authorized for this 243. So I'll stop there, but just some background information, just so if you haven't really worked with EL Civics at all, you kind of know where all this is coming from, that in our WIOA 2 EL Civics, these COAAPs assessments are used lots and lots and lots and lots. Okay, so we also have a website that includes pretty much everything you'd ever want to know and more about California EL Civics. Here's a link to that website. You can, what I did is I specified the section that deals with civic participation in IELCE. That is the component of our EL Civics website focused on COAAPs. That seems to me to be the section that you're probably going to want to learn about the most. So here's a link. Again, it'll be the ultimate, drinking from the fire hose sort of experience, because again, everything you'd want to know and more is on this website. There's way too many documents to reasonably digest all of it, but just know you can go there and find out lots of really good information. The hint will be, as I did put on the screenshot, the section that I really think will be likely to be the most helpful if you really haven't gotten involved in EL Civics too much. To be a little bit more specific, there's a document that simply gives you a detailed list of all these different COAAPs. This is another one where you're going to have way more information in this document than you really need to move forward. So you're going to have to take it with a grain of salt that there's just a lot of stuff here that you may not be particularly concerned about as a CAPE agency, but nonetheless, you do have a list of all COAAPs. It addresses exactly what each one of those COAAPs covers, and it has some details to the right on a lot of specific things that the COAAP assesses and ways in which, it might, help document things that a student achieves through these. So again, probably more information than you need, but for my 2 cents, this is the one that I'm going to say anyway, way, just my opinion, where you might want to start if you want to dig into this, where again, if you're looking at implementing these COAAPs and you've never really looked at COAAPs before, a really good place to start might be to just review what these 60 COAAPs are. And I'll just say, I'm showing you on the screen COAAP number 75. So I'll just add, if that question popped in your mind, why on earth are you saying there's 60 COAAPs when you're clearly showing us number 75? It's because we have them numbered. I believe they're numbered 1 to 55 now, and we skip a few numbers and have a 70 through 75 as well. So there are a few numbers there in the 60s that do get skipped and a few numbers in the 50s that get skipped. But overall, I did a little bean count to be able to say, yeah, there's about 60 total in the CASA CL Civic system. Okay, and so now I'm at another transition point. So I think that's probably more than enough on California EL Civics for now. Some resources to help you get started with that. So I'm now going to transition and get a little bit more into the meat. So once again, another sanity check for everybody. Again, that same drinking from a fire hose analogy. I'm well known for giving people information out of a fire hose. So I always go way out of my way to make sure I'm not overloading or confusing or whatever. Okay, thanks, Lydia. Thanks, Neil. I'll take that and run with it. So again, we mentioned we have 60 or so EL Civics COAAPs, even though the highest numbered one is number 75. But this chart shows those immigrant integration areas, again, economic security, health and well-being, and so on. That is those areas that allies developed several years ago and basically does the crosswalk. So this was about 5 years ago. A team from CASAS and allies got together and really rolled up their sleeve and looked at all of these different COAAPs to see how well they fit into the immigrant integration framework. The short answer is just about everything. I think there were a couple that we had trouble finding a spot for, but it's safe to say about 90 to 95% of all the EL Civics COAAPs fit into one of these areas. This slide just shows you kind of the master chart by COAAP number, which of these areas does each one of these COAAPs fit into. I'll add that we went out of our way to try to just pick one. There's obviously a lot of these COAAPs where you could reasonably say, yeah, it fits to several of these immigrant integration areas, a few of which you could probably even argue have a place in all 6 or 7 categories if you really wanted to be flexible enough. But we really tried to be more specific than that and keep it a little more granular and just choose one of these immigrant integration areas for each COAAP. A little bit of that was just making it a lot easier for things like TE reporting. A little bit of that was just to keep it, super precise. So when you go in and look at this, it's a lot easier to just relate that way. So again, we've got several COAAPs in each one of these areas. I'm obviously not going to read each one, but you see the immigrant integration framework areas with several COAAPs, next to each one of these names. Next, we have the slide that I did my cameo on about a week ago. This is just stretching it out a little bit. So on this slide, again, you can see the top one, economic security. We believe that COAAP numbers 1 through 6 directly relate to that area of economic security. So just to illustrate it here specifically are what each of those COAAPs 1 through 6 addresses. So COAAP 1 is financial services. COAAP 2 is access agencies to resolve consumer complaints and so on. So those first 6, are specifically the ones that we believe relate to economic security. You can read out, those 6 that we have listed under residency. On this next slide, we get into a little bit of detail with health and well-being. What I'll just say is I didn't make slides for all 7 or 8 areas, but there is an additional document, and I think
I forget what, I think one of the TAP staff just put 2 different documents in the chat a few minutes ago. One of them is this PowerPoint. The second one is the document that we put together at CASAS that lists all the immigrant integration goal areas and all the COAAPs. So you have that document that shows the crosswalk for all of the areas and all of the COAAPs in this detail that you can see on the slide. So I don't think we need to go over all areas, but here's some examples that I think make it pretty clear. Okay, another little segue here, getting a little bit more on the TE side now, is we'll start with statewide reporting with the CAPE summary, and we'll kind of morph into, other more granular areas. So here is the CAPE summary report in TE. I showed this a little bit. If you haven't seen this at all, here's where we have that new column for this area. It's just past I3. It's column F, just because, inquiring minds want to know how many of you have seen this new column on the CAPE summary and feel like you already know what I'm talking about here. I know a few of you do, but how many of you have seen this past I3 column? That is column F on the CAPE summary, and already seen how this works in TE. Any of you happen to, well, I know a few of you do, but any of you checked that out already and already seen that past I3 column? All right, thank you for chiming in, a couple of you, thank you. So I know a few of you have seen this past I3 column. So I showed you this just to show where to find it. This is the same CAPE summary we've used now for about 5 years as the way we track all of our outcomes related to CAPE reporting. Long story short is we didn't really feel like this I3 fit exactly into any of those existing areas under AB 104. So we decided to give it its own little column here. And again, it has column F past I3. I added a little bit of this data here just to kind of show some other information too. This is to kind of pick up a little bit on the fact that we already have over 87,000 students that have achieved I3 outcomes. You can see this is our statewide CAPE summary from 2019-2020, and you can see without even realizing that this was an outcome in the first place, we had 87,000 students achieve this outcome. I'll just point that out to say, if we have a concerted effort, we might even be able to do better than that. So I'm just pointing out this is a pretty darn good total when nobody even knew it was an official outcome in the first place, you might say. So this is just kind of the proof in the pudding to say this is just kind of harvesting outcomes in areas where we're already working diligently. It's not really working diligently in an area where we haven't done anything at all. We've got a lot of, we've got a really good head start on this one, you might say, with these numbers. I'm going to sidestep here a little bit because I've got time. So I'll also sidestep and explain these numbers because I have shared this PowerPoint with a few people prior to coming in, and everybody always ends up getting a little bit confused by these numbers. So because everybody does, I'll explain it out a little bit. Again, these are our statewide totals from the CAPE summary 2019-2020. That's why our numbers are so darn huge. We've run it now since we've added the new columns, subsequent to the last, end of year reporting deadline. You can see we have these numbers by program of the number who passed I3 outcomes. I'll note that the biggest number by far is the one that appears in the row for ESL. But that said, we do have numbers here in these other programs. I'll just say that's what confuses people when they see this. How on earth did we have 8,000 CTE students pass EL Civics outcomes? There's no way we had CTE programs doing EL Civics. What I'll just say is I had another piece here that fell off the PowerPoint somewhere, but that 116,000 is the duplicated number. That is when we look at the CAPE summary, if a student is in more than one instructional program, they'll get counted twice. So in most cases, it's probably an ESL student that was also enrolled in CTE or also enrolled in workforce prep or whatever. So that 116,000 is a duplicated count. Just because I kind of like playing around with numbers, don't worry about this if this seemed like Jay wasting everybody's time. But if you look at that number at the bottom, that's the unduplicated count for all of these CAPE programs combined. So we have the 87,000 in ESL. We've got these small numbers in the other, 7 or 8 different programs here. That gives us a duplicated count of 116,000. We know that some students were counted twice based on multiple enrollments. When we unduplicate that number, not so coincidentally, we have a number that's super, super, super close to the number we had up there in ESL. So I really do think that 87,000 under ESL is probably the right number, not the 116. And if you go back and unduplicate it, it goes back to that ESL number. But nonetheless, so that might be 5 minutes you'll never get back, but everybody who's looked at it asked that. So I'll just go out of my way to explain all those numbers, because I'm sure some of you are asking that, privately or whatever. So anyway, those are our numbers we have before we even announce this as an official outcome. Okay, a few things. Oh, here's where I filled in the blank. Sorry, I filled in that part where you can clearly see the total. We've got this number of students and 2 or more out programs. When we unduplicate that, it goes back to the 87,000. So again, past I3 is in column F of the CAPE summary. We already have a good number of students that have been passing these outcomes. The other clarity point I'll go out of my way to say is all programs theoretically can earn I3 outcomes, not just ESL students. The assumption will be that the overwhelming majority of these immigrant integration outcomes will be earned from ESL students, but that's one big difference between CAPE and WIOA 2. In WIOA 2, if you're not in ESL, forget it. It will not be counted as an official outcome, but for CAPE, they can be ABE, CTE, any CAPE program can earn this outcome. It's not restricted to ESL. So I will go out of my way to point out that might be a useful reason for this is on the WIOA 2 side. We've definitely had lots of programs over the years bring that up, that, hey, EL Civics is great, but it would sure be a heck of a lot better if it included students in other programs, specifically ABE and ASE. Bottom line is at the state and federal level, we've never quite figured out a way to make it workable for anybody outside of ESL. I know a lot of people would strongly prefer that it did. So here's a chance for it to go outside of ESL, to do so. All right, thanks. So Bethany's question was, okay, yeah, it's not required for everybody. Thank you, Neil. Yes, we are presenting this as kind of a coalition of the willing. I'll just say, Bethany, I know that you represent a lot of WIOA 2 grant work. So, in your case, you probably are going to have a lot of agencies providing outcomes, but nonetheless, yes, it's not required. Okay, I'm talking about a lot of things at once, so I'm going to move on to the next slide so I don't jumble things up even more. So I'm opening a completely different topic. This does not relate to an I3 outcome. This was another confusion area that a couple people brought up to me in reviewing. So I'm going to say this a second time here, just so I'm extra special careful here, is I want to bring up these AB 104 official CAPE outcomes that we've been talking about since 2016. All of those outcomes that we talk about in things like Bubble Boy slides that I know at least some of you already know and love. So another part of this evolution, in addition to EL Civics, is we've also done some collaborative work between allies and CASAS and looking at those CAPE outcomes and noting how a lot of the outcomes that we track for CAPE also relate quite quite strongly to these areas of immigrant integration. For the third time, I'll backtrack and say, no, these other outcomes will not be included in the CAPE summary column F past I3. The only way you're going to have a number show up in past I3 is when a qualified CAPE student passes a COAAP. That will be the only time you get an I3 outcome. But I will point out a lot of these other outcomes in the area of secondary, post-secondary employment, and so on, we have also found that they relate to immigrant integration. Obviously, when a student gets a job, when a student enrolls in college, those are also things that we definitely feel strongly relate to these immigrant integration indicators. So there's no extra outcome. There's no specific way to track it on the CAPE summary specifically related to immigrant integration. But I'll point out most of the outcomes we're doing already do. If you want that specific list, we have it. I'd be happy to share it with you if you wanted to try to relate that somehow. What I'll say, though, is we haven't really gone that crazy in distributing it. Don't commit this to memory. This is just a visual to show that almost all, not all, but almost all of these relate. This is the bubble boy slide in spreadsheet format, you might say. We're in a spreadsheet. We're listing all those outcomes we have under AB 104. All of the ones highlighted in yellow are the ones that relate to these I3 areas. Again, you can see it's a sea of yellow here. There are very few rows not highlighted. That's just to show that, again, about 90 to 95% of what we've been tracking in CAPE all along, at least according to Allies and CASAS, do relate to these I3 areas, we've been talking about. So, if another way to show that what you're doing is contributing to progress in the area of immigrant integration might be to just do those outcomes you already know and love and look at students that are trying to achieve these. And, you could certainly, use this as a way to show that your students are making progress. Yet another way to do that is through services. We've done the same thing for short-term services, is what we've done for those AB 104 outcomes. We've related services to the I3 areas. We've also related services to EL Civics COAAPs. So there's another document that Allies and CASAS have worked on together over the years that also show how those supportive training and transition services that we document also relate to, all of these different areas. Okay, I'm here at another transition. So I'm going to pause here again because I'm going in a million different directions. I realize a lot of this stuff is pretty darn dense. So another sanity check, everybody hanging in there. Any questions? While I wait for some responses. Thank you. All right, great. So what I'll do is I should have brought this a couple slides ago, but we're at a transition. I also want to bring up, backing this up, I've talked a lot here about CAPE summary. I'll add that we've had some CASAS West Ed meetings here in the last, month or so. We've worked on aligning our systems, a lot better, you might say. It's been some very productive sessions between CASAS and West Ed. One outcome of that is that West Ed is going to be adding, this I3 to Launchboard. So these outcomes that get documented on the CAPE summary will now also be exported to Launchboard and be something you can see in Launchboard in addition to TOPS Enterprise. I think that covers. I know that West Ed is going to be having some similar trainings on how they've updated that. So look for some mid to late April trainings, I believe, through CAPE TAP for West Ed trainings that will show you how to do it on Launchboard, just like I'm showing you to do it in TE. Well, it's not a survey For supported services, okay, thank you, Blair, for chiming in. So, Marin, it's the way there's a lot of ways to do it mechanically. So I'm not going to get into all the various options, but in TE, there's a section in TE where you can record short-term services. In TE, we just have the same categories are what are used for WIOA reporting. The 3 categories being supportive services, training services, and transition services. There's about 8 or 10 specific bubbles under each one of those categories. And if you provide that short-term service for the student, you can mark that as a service. It doesn't count as instructional hours. It doesn't necessarily mean they qualify for official outcomes, but this was a big discussion we had 5 years ago when we started CAPE back in the ABG days, that everybody said you wanted to go ahead and record services and show all of that work you're doing. My recollection is it was kind of something is better than nothing. We want to show everything we're doing. We're spending a lot of time on a lot of these services, so we want to be able to show the legislature all the time we're committing to this. So the way we'll document it is by documenting short-term services. Thanks, Janice put a little blurb about how to access it in TE. Some record this in other systems. There is a way to scan, although I don't know if anybody really does that. But most people just directly mark these in TE. And as you provide counseling services or provide short-term trainings, you can mark them into the system. Okay, so moving along here. Okay, back to that transition slide, and I'll jump in now. Thanks for the question. I'll assume everybody's good. So here's a screenshot, another screenshot of the CASAS website. This I'm sorry I'm playing musical slides, but if you've never seen this before, just to allow some people maybe to do a little bit more dots connecting perhaps, is this is the link to the kind of the main page here on the EL Civics website. So you would click there and that takes you to this next screenshot that kind of initiates your ability to actually select specific COAAPs on the website. So this is the screen you get to when you click that link to select your own agency's COAAPs. You get to the screen to initiate it. This will be another spot where everybody who's doing it for CAPE will necessarily just have to live with the fact that there's going to be a lot of additional information here for WIOA 2 agencies that we're necessarily leaving in and leaving all these details in. You might say there's a lot of details here that if you're CAPE only, you don't really need to worry about. However, we did go out of our way to decide we need to leave all these extra details in because it is very important for the majority of agencies that are still doing it for California WIOA 2. But anyway, you go to this screen and that very first option, that is select pre-approved COAAPs, is what you're going to want to select if you're CAPE only. If you are WIOA 2 and you're doing it fancier where you're developing your own COAAPs or you're going out of your way to revise existing COAAPs, there's lots of flexibility that the EL Civics program has prided itself on for many years and are available. But for my 2 sets, if you're a CAPE-only agency and you're doing this for the very first time, the one and only realistic solution right now is to just go ahead and select those pre-approved COAAPs. That is the canned COAAPs that we've put together at CASAS with the help of many agencies statewide. That is a COAAP that's already put together. You're not doing anything other than taking it out of the box and opening it and administering it to your students. For this purpose for now, we really think the best thing to do is just select pre-approved COAAPs. I'm not going to go through all these steps, but as you select it, it will give you the ability to select which specific COAAPs you wish to do. And we did have a little bit of discussion before this to verify that I'm not giving you false information. And at least according to, a few different people at CASAS, we all agree I'm not giving you false information, is we've set this up now to where if you're a CAPE-only agency, agency and you don't have these additional funding sources, that will definitely not be a problem. You can just go ahead and click this link and get to the screen, click select a pre-approved COAAPs, go through the process and click the radio buttons next to the COAAPs that you wish to administer at your agency. I'll say if you're an agency brand new to this, don't select 5 or 6, select 1 or 1 only. Maybe you want to select 2. My input would be to select 1 and only 1 for now. Click through it and you'll be approved. You know, we kind of set up the website so it won't go through a bunch of additional approval steps for you, so you can go ahead and do it CAPE only. Some of you that are WIOA 2 are probably scratching your heads when I say that, but making a long story short, short story long for accountability purposes, there's all kinds of things built into TE related to WIOA 2 focus areas that check for that, and the only agencies that are going to get payment points are the agencies that have checked all those additional boxes for WIOA 2. So we've already reviewed it and feel pretty strongly that we can take out all those bells and whistles on the website, and it really shouldn't affect California payment point, WIOA 2 payment points, 1 iota. So again, you might say we've cleansed this a little bit so anybody can go in and just select these COAAPs. Okay, and then here is just another screenshot of what you get. Again, probably bad example on my part. Hold that thought a minute. So bad example on my part because I'm giving you a screenshot where I told you don't select 5 or 6, select 1 and only 1, so you're not biting off more than you can chew. And here I go give you a screenshot example with 6 selected. But anyway, as you go through, this is the screenshot you'll get after you make the selections on the website. You'll click that final click and it will give you a summary screen here showing you which ones you selected and allow you to kind of confirm that that looks correct or doesn't look correct for here. So I got a question here about, you know, some of the other issues we have for WIOA 2. So what I brought up are kind of the agency level issues we have, where if you're California EL Civics, there's a lot of things you need to select in TE, so TE knows that that's a funding source for you, and it will only credit those payment points if you have those funding sources checked. So again, if you're CAPE only, obviously you won't have them checked, so it won't have any impact whatsoever on California payment points. Similarly, a couple of you who do that have brought up the idea that a couple of you have brought up the idea that in WIOA 2, there's a lot of extra hoops in the data reports, related to testing and hours and so on, that are important if you're trying to get California WIOA 2 EL Civics payment points, but are not important for this purpose. Yes, we've gone out of our way to exclude all of those EL Civics related drop reasons. So things like EL Civics incomplete outcome data set, for a few of you that know that term well, will not be imposed in any way, shape, or form on the CAPE side. Again, they'll continue to be imposed for WIOA 2, no changes there, but in CAPE, we're purposefully going out of our way to make sure none of those things get in the way for this reporting. Okay, and then here's the one area where we dig a little deep. I kind of said I'm avoid getting too deep in TE because a lot of you really would, I know, don't want to. So here's the one slide where I kind of got a little deeper here, with some general directions on how you can add a COAAP. There's lots of documentation we have that gets into more detail, but at the top, again, that's the TE menu option. You go to Records Tasks, you click the button called New, and then that brings up a screenshot that looks exactly like the screenshot you see here on this slide. And again, some real basic things. Again, we're trying to keep it as easy as possible. There are things like student ID and assessment date and program year that we can't get out of. So there are a few things that you've got to put in TE in order to avoid basic errors. So that's what we have up at the top. And then the big one I really think is this middle one right here. This arrow that I'm kind of, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I've got it actually, I'll move there. This is the one that I really think is the key ingredient. If you've got a passable working knowledge of TE, you kind of know some of those steps for creating records manually, but this is the step that's going to be elusive, even if you're kind of an advanced user, is when you're creating these COAAPs manually. The key thing is an assessment type. You want to check this box, EL Civics Additional Assessment Form. If you open up a new test record by default, predictably enough, you're going to get a pre and post test that you're going to be entered, not a COAAP. So you do need to check this box and assessment type so TE knows that you want to manually create a new COAAP and not a new pre or post test form. So again, this is the key step that most users miss. This is the step, at least for my 2 cents, you want to be most mindful about when you're doing a COAAP. So again, once you select EL Civics Additional Assessment Form, then when you're selecting the test form number, you'll just have a list of all the possible COAAPs rather than a list of all the possible, CASAS pre and post test forms. And then at the bottom, of course, you need to check the box labeled passed when they actually pass, of course, to show that it's a pass COAAP and not a failed COAAP. That's obviously also a very important part of this process. Okay, and then this is my reminder again, EL Civics Additional Assessment Form. And, a quick segue. Again, I'm not spending a lot of time, on the website stuff or the manual entry stuff. I'm trying to hit the happy medium where I really feel it necessary to make sure everybody realizes these steps do exist. I want to give some information on how to move forward, on how to complete these steps, but obviously we can get bogged down on these steps and not have time to talk about any of this other stuff if we get too far bogged down. So here's me saying exactly that and kind of getting myself out of that rabbit hole before I'm too far down to get out safely. Okay, so we're moving to the reports here. All right, thank you. A couple of you have sent best wishes to Oscar, our tech support person. So thank you very much for those best wishes. How do you get, well, you don't really need to click retest, but if you've, so I think what you're saying is the student does a COAAP and doesn't pass. So in that case, you do the same steps you have here, but if they don't pass, obviously complete all these steps except the last one. Obviously you can't check the box labeled passed if they didn't pass, but what you can do is, I don't think you really need to click. The retested is more for conservative estimate scores. So all you really do is you just need to make sure you leave the passed box unchecked in your example, and then you can go and administer it again. And then the second time when hopefully they do passed, you just have the first one where you didn't check that box labeled passed, and then a second one where you would go in and obviously check that box the second time, because we're assuming them after the second try, they do in fact pass. But retested, sorry, I'll get in the weeds a little bit for you, Isabel, because I know that's where you like to rest a lot, is the retested is for those conservative estimate diamond score pretests. That is if you're willfully retesting in response to a diamond score. So as you know, that's a choice. So that's what that box is for. If that sounds like gobbledygook to some of you, don't worry about it. That's just a response to a very direct question. Okay, so moving along here, I'm going to move along out of the mechanical entry part in TE. I'm staying in TE, but I'm moving out of data entry and moving into the reports. So for starters, here's another TE screenshot. This is just showing where you go in TE to find said reports, as we have reports, state reports, and you can see there's 2 new ones that we're covering here now. We've got EL Civics Immigrant Integration Indicators, or I3, and the EL Civics I3 Summary. Short answer is that top one that I have highlighted is the one that gets at student level detail. They can be pretty long reports. They get get to the student level, you can run it agency-wide or by class. And then that EL Civics I3 summary is more of a big picture report where it's just summarizing by item count, the number of individual COAAPs attempted versus the individual number of COAAPs passed. So this is the menu where you can find these new EL Civics I3 reports. Okay, before this is gonna seem like I'm kind of pulling the chair out from under you a little bit with this slide. Hey, wait a minute. I thought you were talking all about I3. This has nothing to do with I3. It isn't even in the menu. You just showed us a slide ago, for crying out loud. What gives? So, but I did do this on purpose, just out of morbid curiosity. How many of you are familiar right away with this report that I'm showing on the screenshot right now? Does it look familiar to some of you? It should look familiar to at least a few of you anyway. Okay, thank you. Some of you are chiming in. Great. So this is the class performance by competency report. This is anything but new. This is the one we've had in software format for 20 years in TE and TOPSpro. We've had it in pencil paper format for much longer than that. But again, this is the class level competency report that a lot of you have used forever, where you've got a separate page on the report for each different CASAS test form number. In this case, I'm just showing you a snippet from form 185R, the C-level life and work reading test. Again, you've got the, it's got itself organized by test item number. So that column labeled position 1 just means test item number 1, test item number 2, test item number 3, and so on, and then provides that CASAS competency information for each individual test item, giving you the competency number along with the competency description, and then looking at all the students that completed that particular test item, in this case under CASAS form 185R, and giving you a percentage of students that got that particular item correct. So just to jump on this example here, no real bad examples. This is a pretty good performing class. But if you look at item number 2, hey, that competency number 1.3.6, not sure if it's the top priority, but it looks like this class is super duper outstanding on using coin operated machines. You can see from number 1, they're also doing a really good job identifying how to obtain government services. So again, by looking at the test items, you get a certain percentage of students that got that item correct. The higher percentage, the better your class is doing. So at the end of the day, this is a way where if you're a teacher in this class, you can look at the students that completed each form number. In this case, we've got 30 students. So it's a nice, robust group of students that gives us a good bunch of data here. By the number correct, we can use that to make some general conclusions on items in which our class is performing well versus other items in which our class might be performing poorly. So right now there's no real weak areas, but if item number 3 showed 29% instead of 69%, for example, we might need to look at improving work-related correspondence or maybe safety in the workplace. Because again, you can see under item number 3, those are areas covered under item number 3. In my example, I'm just pretending like we're not doing so well. So does everybody remember that from the class performance by competency? I'm making a really big stinking deal about this, even though it's not even covered in the agenda, to just show this is the basis or the framework, you might say, that we use for our I3 reports. We know that people have used this method of thinking in our competency and content standard reports for a very long time. So we're using that. I really think the same methodology in I3 is what we're using for the TE test results reports. The big obvious difference of course, is that the TE test results reports that you already know and love are gleaning information from the student's performance on CASAS pre and post tests, whereas I3 are using it from EL Civics COAAPs rather than the pre and post tests. You know, the COAAPs aren't really related to content standards or competencies. You might say the COAAPs themselves already represent that in a lot of ways. So we're using the content of the COAAP for I3, not competency. So hopefully there's some clarity there somewhere, but I just wanted to bring out, this is another kind of instance where, pardon the cliche, but we're not wanting to reinvent the wheel. We know we have a framework that everybody's used to use your assessment results to inform instruction, and a lot of you have done it for many years. So the concept in I3 in our minds is really that same methodology, same concept. So without further ado, here's a snippet of the EL Civics Immigrant Integration Indicators report by class. So we've got a class here. We've just got a snippet here with a few students in the class, but we've got it at the student level here, where for each individual student, we're showing which COAAPs, you know, each individual passed. And then just like we talked about with those crosswalks, we're relating that particular civic objective to that immigrant integration goal area. So in this case, the top student on the list passed COAAP number 48, which is addresses using online tools to learn, communicate, and collaborate. Sounds a lot like digital literacy to me. So obviously that COAAP relates to the immigrant goal integration goal area of digital literacy. So we can say, yeah, that student completed that EL Civics COAAP, showed that they knew the areas covered in that COAAP. So that suggests that student has made some improvement in the area of digital literacy. Just one more example, you can see, item number 11, research and describe cultural backgrounds and barriers. That relates to the immigrant integration goal area of civic and community participation, and so on. So again, we think the concept is the same. With competency reports, it's basically getting an item right on the CASAS test, shows that you've got some sort of proficiency in that area. Passing the COAAP also shows that the student has at least some proficiency in these areas that we've related with the help of allies and others. So that's the by the class level. Just blowing it up. Again, it's showing that goal area. We've got those 8 I3 areas, identified by AB 2098. So that's what we're getting here in the immigrant integration goal areas. We're just using that allies model directly and showing how those COAAPs relate. Okay, and then the civic objectives passed, as I said, that's the specific COAAP. When you select, one of those COAAPs, item 1 through item 75, the student passes that specific EL Civics COAAP. The report will identify which one the student passed, give you a little short statement, letting you know, so you don't have to commit it to memory, what area that COAAP item number is, and then again relates it to one of those 8 I3 categories. Okay, in this example, I think I went through all this. I guess I should have gone through the slides a little bit as I explained it, but I think I showed that top student already and went through a couple examples for that top student. So just to summarize, this student has passed 5 different COAAPs this year. If you do California EL Civics, the last few years, that's really not that unusual. Lots of students pass multiple COAAPs in a year. So in this case, this student has passed 5 different COAAPs. Those 5 different COAAPs cover 3 different I3 goal areas, as you can see from this report. Okay, and then I'll also show, this is just a visual, the same exact information we just showed you the last few slides. But in this case, it's just showing you that you can run it by agency as well. So that's kind of a you say tomato, I say tomato issue. You can run the whole agency and just get a list of all your students at one agency and see how they're doing with this, or you can do it by class. If you're a larger agency, I would say if you're an existing California EL Civics agency and you've got a lot of this going on and you're just trying to see how it relates to CAPE and how it relates to I3, you'd want to run it by class. If you're a brand new CAPE agency and never done it before, it might make more sense to run it by agency because you're probably not going to have that many people that jump into this if you're not doing EL Civics already. But again, this is showing you by agency and by class. Okay, and then the last one is the EL Civics I3 summary. Again, this is just what it sounds like. It's a summary of our I3 results. The first one is kind of getting in the weeds, giving us student level information. This is just summarizing. So this is a larger agency. For some of you, these numbers might be pie in the sky, I admit. But again, it's just looking at these different immigrant integration goal areas. So you can see the first one is economic security. At this agency, there was one COAAP we worked on, COAAP number 4 on housing. You can see here's the number that attempted, the number passed. We've got a couple COAAPs we've worked on in the second area and so on. So if we've done a lot of COAAPs, and I know a lot of you in WIOA 2 anyway, this is a pretty common example, not really as weird as it seems. You can take a look and kind of get an overview of how well your agency is doing COAAP wise with the number attempted, number passed, and then a percentage of those passed as a way to kind of monitor yourselves at the agency level. Okay, so I was about where I was thinking. That is, I ran over an hour, but not quite the full hour and a half. I do still have a few more minutes to discuss, but I'm at another fork in the road here. So any questions? Sanity check here. The number dropped off a little bit once I kind of got in the TE weeds, but it didn't drop off too badly. So I'll just say sanity check. Is everybody hanging in there? Some of you precariously, we might have gone too deep in the weeds for some, I'm not sure. Okay, thank you. Everybody seems okay. At least the ones responding are the ones, of course, who are saying it's all dandy, I guess. Okay, so this is just kind of recapping because there were some little kind of nuggets related to policy, quote unquote, you might say, that I sort of slipped in there. You know, we're talking about 2098 and EL Civics and TE reporting and TE reports all the same. So just a recap of some of the key nuggets that may not have resonated as much as they should. So again, I3 outcomes are now available and reported as an official CAPE outcome on the TE CAPE summary report. That's fact number 1. Fact number 2, CAPE learners can earn I3 outcomes by passing any EL Civics COAAP that relates to one of those I3 goal areas. You know, that's now, you know, also a fact. Just to make sure I'm not overstating the issue and leading anybody down the wrong path, there are many other CAPE services and outcomes that we feel also strongly relate to the I3 areas, but just better safe than sorry. Doing this does not register as an I3 outcome on the TE CAPE summary. That's also a fact. Okay, another fact is CAPE agencies can select COAAPs assessments from the CASAS EL Civics website. We've modified the website, so anybody who's funded for CAPE can do this, not just those that are funded for WIOA 2 EL Civics. If you did it last year, you would have gotten all kinds of error message in that case, but we kind of went through the steps and we feel very strongly that all of the safeguards are already programmed into TE anyway. So having those safeguards on the website, you know, quite frankly, you know, mostly pretty much unnecessary. So that's also a fact. Also a fact is CAPE agencies can record EL Civics, COAAPs, and TE. There's never been a barrier for that. The barrier that we have related to WIOA 2 is just whether or not passing that COAAP earns you a payment point. We've got enough in TE that takes care of that already. So any agency, WIOA funded or not, or for that matter, really, you don't need to be CAPE funded either. Anybody who uses TE, quite frankly, can go in and manually enter, that a student passed a COAAP. And then the final fact is CAPE agencies can use the EL Civics Immigrant Integration Indicators and the EL Civics I3 summary reports in TE to, review all of your I3 results and use these results from COAAPs assessments to inform instruction. I don't know about that. Anyway, I think there's a training on that coming up, and I'm backing away from that one. Anyway, so I think that's everything I have. Thank you very much. It was right about, Veronica, I think I said 1:10, didn't I? So
Yeah,
we
you
ended
did.
right about when we said it would be too long for an hour, but probably not a full hour and a half. So I will just stop here. If you feel cheated, I'll stop here and allow you to ask me as many questions if you want. If this is 20 bonus minutes, well, congratulations. Everybody has 20 bonus minutes. Lionel, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is this is available for the CAPE consortium managers. So I can't remember what your role is now, Lionel. I know you've got a new role. I can't remember what that is. Shoot, are you in Peggy's consortium maybe, Lionel? I forget now. Are you in De Anza or are you in West Hills? I can't remember that now. But whoever that is, I don't think you're in Ilsa's consortium. I think you're in the next one up. But now I can't remember who the consortium manager is for your consortium. Oh, okay, Karen. So Karen probably has it. If she doesn't, then you could potentially volunteer to be that person, but it would be good for you to check with her first because she might have it already. If she does, then she can give you the same level access as that director. If she does not have it, then you and Karen can come back to us and we can definitely set up that level of access for, your consortium.
Okay, thanks,
Check
Jay.
with her if you don't mind. If, this is TMI, but I would bet without, I wouldn't take you up on this, but if I had to guess, I wouldn't be surprised if you've got it for San Mateo maybe, but it might still be under Tim's name or something.
Okay, thank you, Jay.
All right, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Because we're early here. Anything else at all? All right, Veronica, I'm going to take the money and run, I think, after this.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you everyone for participating in this afternoon's webinar. We have posted the handout as well as the PowerPoint presentation. So if you haven't accessed those documents, you're able to at this time. Join us tomorrow if you haven't registered. Neil and I will be going over CFAT information as well as presenting a live demonstration so that everyone can submit their CFAT by the May 2nd deadline. So join us. And then we also have another webinar with Jay and Nicole of CASAS, and they'll be going over the employment survey in TE. So you want to make sure you register and join us for that. That'll be Tuesday, March 30th at 12:00 p.m. And then we have some other offerings such as the Immigrant Integration Peer Learning Circle, as well as a Student Transition Peer Learning Circle coming up in early April. So I believe the registration link has been provided in the chat. Thank you so much, Mandalee. And also please complete the evaluation and let Jay know what you webinar, and then also use that as an opportunity to address any information needs that you may have at this time. We do utilize those results to plan our future training and professional development opportunities. So thank you all very much for your time. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the website. We'll also send everyone a link to the recording as well as the evaluation. So that you'll have access to all of those details. So thank you all very much for your time, your participation. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. If not, we'll see you back again next Tuesday. So everyone have a great afternoon.